Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dragon Con Urban Fantasy Track author interview series. My guest today is the fabulous Melissa F. Olson, longtime supporter of the track, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. So thank you so much, Melissa. And I have a number of questions for you, and we will get to all of your different works and let you tell the folks about them. And because there is quite a variety. But I typically ask people this question first, simply because it's something that I am always curious about, is whether or not you read fantasy and sci-fi as a child or, a young adult. Did you get started into it that early?
Oh, awesome question. I was a huge reader. I was definitely a reader before I ever thought about being any kind of writer. And so when I was little, my parents eventually kind of got sick of driving me to the library. And so for a long time, what I read was what my parents owned. And so that was Mary Higgins Clark and Robert B. Parker. And those were like just what I read. And then when I was a teenager, maybe 14 or 15, I discovered Anita Blake's books, the Anita Blake books by Laurel K. Hamilton, especially the early ones. And those are really just great models, I think, of the urban fantasy genre at its creation. I think they're like those early novels are really just such a fun example of the form. And between that and watching Buffy, like it was very just influential on me. And then the Anita Blake series kind of took a turn, in my opinion, and got a little bit more erotic focused. And I have nothing against that, but as a 15, 16-year-old, it was probably not, I kind of left the series. And for the longest time, I didn't touch urban fantasy. I went to school and I double majored in film and television and then English literature. So I was reading a lot of the stodgy classic novels, classic literature in all my free time. And then, after when I was, and I never took any creative writing classes in school, not one. My English degree is in English lit. But then after college, I moved back to Madison from California, and my little sister was reading this book that she's like, you have to try this. It's so interesting. And I was like, I don't know. It's got this dark cover and everything's like dirty. And the book was Nightlife by Rob Thurman.
Ah, okay.
And for those who haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. It does something very interesting in terms of point of view. There's a shift in the middle of the book, which is unexpected, and very few writers, I feel like, could pull it off. And I just got hooked. And I discovered this whole world of, urban fantasy and genre authors. And really, because by then, there's quite a backlog for me to catch up on, right, in terms of reading.
Yeah.
And I was starting to be a creative writer at the same time. I was just kind of messing around, taking classes at night and online. And I kind of said to myself that I wouldn't ever write my own urban fantasy unless I could think of something that I hadn't seen before, like a angle or a power or a character. And you'll notice how carefully I worded that, something I hadn't seen before. I don't pretend to be the inventor of the null power, which I came up with for the Scarlet Bernard books. But at the time that I kind of came up with it, I hadn't seen it anywhere. And I just got so excited. And I wrote that novel really fairly quickly for having a full-time job and a little kid at home and stuff. And that just kind of launched my whole career. So I started reading urban fantasy when I was young, but I took a break for probably almost 10 years and didn't touch it. And then jumped right back in with both feet.
Now, you mentioned that you specialized in English lit. And so that was kind of, I was curious about that when I saw that you had, an English degree, and I was curious what your favorite time period or what your specialty was. So you've already told me what your specialty was. Did you have a favorite time period? Because That is actually one of my areas of love as well. But I'm curious if you have a specific time period you were most interested.
I wouldn't say that there's a time period that's really drawn me. When I was going through college, English, it was still a lot of old white dudes. It was a very old white dude focused field, and we did read some authors, but female authors. But I that's one of the things that I'm glad is starting to kind of shift. I feel like English literature departments at universities are becoming more inclusive of women and people of color and just the not straight white dude crowd. I really liked the Gothic period very much, and that's echoed in some of the things I've written. I liked Gothic horror very much, both British and American versions. Because horror then in those sort of time periods isn't the same as reading a horror novel today, or especially like a horror movie today. I feel like there's a much stronger emphasis now on shock, where back then there was a much stronger emphasis on ideas that were horrifying and revolutionary, and now might even seem a little tame. So that was one that really drew me. And then paradoxically, I really liked Jane Austen. I really saw her novels in terms of their sort of satirical, critical value of the society that she was living in. And so there's a reason why she's an icon, right? There's a reason why so many people say that. And yeah, I'm all in on Jane Austen. The Brontes, not as much, but Jane Austen.
I'm a big Jane Eyre fan myself.
Really?
But not so. I like Jane Eyre. I thought it was a lot of fun, but not so much Wuthering Heights. That one just every time I read that, or I've read it a couple of times, but I'm just like, why am I doing this? But in any case, I digress. Now, also you had a double major in film, correct? And how do you feel that your background in film has affected your writing?
Oh, I mean, I think it caused me to start writing. I majored in film and television at USC, and then I worked in the studio system for a little bit right after college. And the kind of biggest sliding doors moment of my life is, I really was in a good job as an assistant, to a senior VP at NBC Universal shortly after college, and just, on the trajectory toward the studio system. And then my entire department, 3 weeks into the job, got laid off. So they raised it. It was the USA and Sci-Fi original content. So I worked on Battlestar Galactica. I worked on Monk. And by worked on, I mean mostly collated scripts and answering the phone, but still technically I contributed. But so I helped with those shows, and we were doing really well, but NBC, the network, had a really bad year. And so they kind of just raised the cable TV development. And, I just didn't get a job for a while. And then the job that I did have, I got laid off again in 5 months. And so I kind of moved back to Wisconsin for a bit to lick my wounds. And my plan was to kind of, do TV production stuff here. But it was so boring and dry. And I missed stories. When I worked in TV development, I read scripts every day. I was a big script reader, and I was very good at writing coverage. And so I missed stories. I missed fictional stories. And it had never in my life even honestly really crossed my mind to write fiction at that point at 23. But I found that I just had this longing to get back to the story framework. And so that's when I started kind of just messing around with a class here and there from the School of Continuing Education. A couple years into that, I went back and got my master's degree. And so kind of learned fiction, a little bit more that way. So I was not a late bloomer, but there are a lot of writers I know who will, I've wanted to be a writer since I was 11. And for me, it was more that I had this education in film and television, and I missed telling those stories And working for USA and Sci-Fi, they were genre stories, right? They were detective stories. They were space stories, alien stories. And I missed those. I missed them so much that I figured out how to make them by myself.
Oh, well, there you go.
I'm like the only person I know who had creative writing as their backup career. Like that was my fallback plan, creative writing.
Right. Well, we're glad it worked out for you.
It worked out okay.
And you had explained already kind of how you got drawn into urban fantasy, and that at least early on, that that Laurel K. Hamilton was your kind of your gateway, and then later on became Rob Thurman, and so on. And was it at that point when you really enjoyed nightlife? Were you saying to yourself, hey, maybe I could do this? Is that kind of...
Oh, no, I wouldn't even let myself like dream in that direction at that time. The first book that I wrote was actually a hard-boiled PI novel. It was very, and I look at it now, it's a rough book, but it was very much a reaction to all those years of reading my mom's Mary Higgins Clark and my dad's Robert B. Parker. I was so just obstinate about the limitations of the PI novel genre at that time. Right. So I was like, I'm going to write a female PI, and she's going to be married and pregnant and taking a case involving a child, which are things that don't happen in Robert B. Parker books, right? And so the first book that I wrote was just more reacting against this frustration at like not seeing the kind of female-driven books that I really wanted to see. Not many of them. Of course, there are a handful, but at the time that I was looking around and just not seeing very much in that field. But I was so scared to write urban fantasy ever, because there were so many, by then I had found some of the bigger names, Jim Butcher, Patricia Briggs, Carrie Vaughn. And I was so in awe of the writing that they were doing, because when you pick up those books, it's like you think you're in escapism, right? And it is escapism, absolutely. But there are vegetables hidden in the cupcakes. There's so many just strong allegorical content. Charlaine Harris writes about vampires coming out of the coffin, and it's very allegorical toward people who have, been hiding themselves their whole life and finally get to like come out, and the reactions that they find. And Carrie Vaughn writes about werewolves coming home from war, soldiers coming home from war, and being different and having these new impulses and tendencies and not knowing how to handle them. So I think what really awed me about urban fantasy was that it's the thing you read for fun and to relax and to enjoy, but but there's the opportunity there to say something too,
right? If
you want to, and if you're looking for it. And I think that really blew me away, but it was a long time before I felt confident enough to try it myself.
Now, and that you actually answered my next question, which was about the Scarlet Bernard series, and my question was, well, I know that was the first one that was published.
Yeah.
But I didn't know if it was the first one you'd written. So you answered that. So the Lena Dane book was actually written first, but came out.
I wrote that one first, and I think it shows. I don't reread my books very often, but I did reread Lena a couple years ago because I was pitching a sequel, and the writing is, in my opinion, not as strong in that one, but I still like the character. I still like the plot that I came up with. I still like so much about it. But I was also a baby writer, learning how to write my first book. And I think that it's really hard to put all of this time and energy and childcare money and, all of these things into writing your first book, and then have to say, okay, let's go on number 2. When you finish that first book, I still remember the feeling of driving home from Walgreens Office Max, after getting my book printed out to look at, right? So I wrote The Big Keep. I paid the money to have it printed up at Office Max and like have that like binding on it, the like fancy plastic one, right? The fancy plastic one. I remember my husband at the time drove me home. And I remember sitting in the passenger seat, holding it and just feeling this joy. Like, holy crap, I did it. I wrote a book. And I think it's really hard for writers to have that feeling and get to that point and then, not have it immediately snatched up by a publisher and,
Right.
and have to and have to start another book. It's a bit like trying to get pregnant again after having my first baby. Like, I needed some time,
Right.
to appreciate what I'd accomplished before I started things that were new. But yeah, it was a great feeling. But looking back, the idea for Scarlet was stronger, and more importantly, Scarlet actually came about because of Hellboy 2. Did I ever tell you this story?
No, I have not heard this one, so go for it.
Okay, the movie Hellboy 2, which is a great, there aren't very many good urban fantasy movies because it's a genre that tends to favor television, right? Because you need a little time to kind of set up characters and set up world building, right? And it's difficult to do that in like 15 minutes and then have the rest of your movie. So I think Hellboy 2 is a stronger film than Hellboy because they've set up the characters in the world and everything. But in that movie, there's this not that long scene where Hellboy and his team go and they visit this goblin market. And they can't see what's happening in the goblin market. And then they get these special goggles and they're able to see everything. And there's this thriving whole like community underworld. And I'm like, what a perfect metaphor for urban fantasy, that and this idea of like the hidden world. But I started thinking about those goggles and I thought about them all the time. And I was like, what if there was a way, like a character who could see the hidden world? And then I, was kind of playing with that. And well, what if she could find it? And for a while I played with the idea of a main character who could find anything. And, I started writing the character and it was okay. But it just doesn't really grab me. And I'm like, well, okay, so she can find, magic things and stuff, but and then I was just playing with it and then I said, well, what if she took it away? What if she took away what was magic when it was close to her? Like, what if she completely neutralized vampires, werewolves, everybody when they were nearby? And then as soon as they moved away again, they were themselves. And like, it sounds cheesy, but the minute I had that thought, I knew exactly who Scarlet was. Like, I just knew she was going to be sarcastic and a little immature and a reluctant hero, and, have this really good heart, but had been hurt a lot and was trying to lock out the world. Like, I just knew her voice right away, so fast. But I did actually work the character that I had come up with who could find anything. She actually showed up in my second book. I didn't want to waste the research, Carol. Like, I didn't want to
right.
I didn't want to waste all that. Because, she had a whole backstory about being a police photographer, crime scene photographer, and all this. So she actually turns up in my second book, Trail of Dead, as like a romantic foil for Scarlet. And so it's really fun getting to like kind of compare these two. But she was my original protagonist. But yeah, so Scarlet really kicked things off for me. And a lot of people found my books because of the spin-off, Boundary Crossed. Because it was a Kindle first deal. And so it was, they were just giving it away, throwing it at people through email. And so a lot of people found me there, but, Scarlet was really my whole door in to writing urban fantasy.
Now, if you were going to give what's your elevator pitch for anybody who may be watching this that hasn't read the Scarlet Bernard series, what would be your elevator pitch for describing what is it all about?
You haven't read my books? No, I completely get that. So Scarlet is the Dead Spots, the first book, is about a young woman who is a null, meaning she can, whenever anything supernatural gets close to her, she completely turns them human again. And her job is to clean up crime scenes that have a supernatural bent to make sure that people can't figure out that there is a whole world beneath the world. And one night she arrives at one of those crime scenes just a little too late. So that would be my kind of
There you go.
sentence. You didn't tell me I had to prepare anything, Carol.
but
But that would
no,
be
but
the pitch.
But that is a great lead in, and I think very accurately represents what people can expect. So there we go. And then you did talk about the Boundary Magic series too. And what would you say in terms of how would you kind of describe that one for people?
You know, I actually think about when I was starting Boundary Magic. So when I had written 3 Scarlet books, and my publisher did not want any more right in the series. They wanted me to come up with a new idea because they're really into trilogies. And I said, what? All of this time and effort into this world. I love this world. I have so much more to say about my world. And I was like, so how about a spinoff? And they kind of hemmed and hawed, but they, you know, I still had a contract and they had to let me write something. So they let me do it. And I actually thought quite a bit about Lex and how she would be different from Scarlet, because the sort of natural thing would be to write the opposite of Scarlet.
Right.
But I didn't like that. That felt really cheesy and tropey. So instead, I thought a lot about patron heroes. So instead of patron saints, who would be like your patron superhero? And Lex's patron hero would be Captain America. Like, she has this, so she is a Army veteran. She has this very strong sense of duty and community, and also like personal sacrifice, giving of herself to the cause. You know, she is the person who would throw herself on a grenade. But she's also harder. I mean, she's seen like her personality is kind of hard because she's seen a lot. She's been through a lot. She's died like twice before the opening of the book. Scarlet's patron saint was John McClane from Die Hard, who's not a superhero, but he is to me the quintessential reluctant hero. You know, John McClane just wanted someone else to come and frickin' fix it. You know, he spends the whole first 3/4 of that movie just trying to get some police or FBI or somebody in here to stop the bad guys. You know, and as he's running around fighting the bad guys, he's wishing someone else would come in and, like, Scarlet at the beginning of her series, she just wants to go watch TV. Like, that's what she really wants. Is she wants to drink a little bit and be left alone and watch television. But she keeps, she has this extremely unique and valuable ability to nullify supernatural powers. She keeps getting sucked into these messes. And so it was really fun to write a reluctant hero. But with Boundary Crossed, I also wanted to write like an intentional hero, someone who runs toward the fight. You know, and I always say, like, in any conflict, Scarlet's first reaction is to say something sarcastic, and Lex's first reaction is to punch it.
Right.
And, you know, that's kind of, so what my maybe favorite thing to write in the world is, you know, later in the series, I do have some crossovers where I get to write Lex and Scarlet together. And that is just candy. Those scenes are so much fun to write. And it's so much fun to play with their dynamic and have it evolve over, you know, these short scenes in a whole bunch of books and short stories, and to keep throwing them together to watch them, you know, react. I'm sorry. That was like so much longer than your question. I'm not used to talking to you, Carol, without any other authors to like.
Well, but this is your chance to get to talk more. So,
all right.
And then the next series that I wanted to touch on just a little bit was the Nightshades.
Yeah.
Which is a whole different, you know, the tone is different in it, but it does. And you've got a male protagonist.
Yeah.
And you've also you're able to go back to that kind of that mystery and suspense background that plays a role in all of your other stuff as well. But I think in this one, it becomes more of a focus. So how did the Nightshade series come about? And just tell us a little bit about it.
the Nightshades trilogy came about because of karaoke at cons.
Hellboy and karaoke. I love it. Okay.
That is 100% true. So Nightshades was born as a project when I was in grad school. And it was I took a screenwriting course, and it was originally started life as a TV pilot because I had been watching a lot of procedural shows, and they're never supernatural. Like the supernatural shows are not usually like there's often a procedural element. Buffy would have a monster a week, but they're very serialized. You really have to stay with it each week. Meanwhile, these shows, there are good procedural shows, Bones, The Mentalist, NCIS, Original Recipe, that they never had the supernatural element. And I really wanted to write that thing that I hadn't seen once again, right? Or hadn't seen a lot of. And I couldn't quite make the screenplay work. I was too new at screenwriting at the time. So I kind of shoved it in a drawer. So years later, I was doing Convergence in Minneapolis. And I loved Convergence so much when it was it did an urban fantasy as sort of the theme of the whole con. So they had these wonderful, wonderful urban fantasy authors there, and I was able to participate. And it's like most cons, there's a thriving writer's scene at the bar.
Of course, yeah.
There were a group of people who would go sing karaoke at like 1 a.m. one of the nights, including Lee Harris, who is, an editor. And at the time, he was an editor at Angry Robot. And we sang karaoke and hung out at the bar, and it was really fun. And I considered him a friend, and I still do, certainly. But so some time goes by, and Lee was hired to run a new imprint of novellas for Tor. So Tor.com was, this novella imprint was just beginning. Now I feel like so remarkable. They have all of these wonderful books, but because at the time it was just starting out and novellas weren't as popular or well known. And Lee actually contacted me. So I'll treasure this forever. Like the one time in my life, an editor contacted me and said, so I'm starting this novella division. Do you have anything for me? Like, can you pitch me anything? And, for once, like my brain just did the right little math and said, well, wait a minute. I have this TV pilot. And, I was thinking if a full-length novel gets turned into a 2-hour movie, maybe I could take my 1-hour pilot and adapt it into a novella, a short novel. Yeah. That's a lot of math, but I swear it makes sense. So I wrote Nightshades intentionally trying to make it similar in structure to 1-hour procedural television. So it has 5-act breaks. It has kind of those similar beats of like an episode of NCIS or Bones or The Mentalist. I actually watched The Mentalist a lot and really took it apart because I had never written novellas before. I'd only written like full-length novels, and I knew they needed to be different, but I wasn't sure how. So I leaned really into that. And I've always enjoyed a good team story, found families for sure, but also like the way that a team comes together and becomes a found family is always a great story, in my opinion. So I wrote Nightshades, and if we're being completely honest, Carol, because why not?
Why not?
I also kind of wrote it for my dad to have something of mine to read, because he read the Scarlet books, but like kind of like out of obligation. And I wanted to write the kind, because, there's feelings, Carol.
Right.
In those books. There's feelings and a little bit of kissing and I've always felt like my books were like PG-13 with some extra F-bombs, but I could tell they weren't my dad's exact cup of tea. So when I was writing Nightshades, I wanted to write something a little bit more, not male focused, but certainly more friendly to the males in my own life.
Right.
And I loved writing those books. I loved working with Lee. I was so lucky. I mean, now I feel like the Tor.com imprint has, they have all these Hugos, all these awards, this amazing fiction by a lot of writers who are generally underrepresented. And I'm so proud of them. And I kind of can't believe that they were willing to make my weird little commercial, vampire FBI story. Oh, I didn't logline. Okay. So my favorite logline is just what my favorite review of Nightshades, which is Criminal Minds with Vampires.
There you go.
Somebody wrote that as a review, and I'm like, I love you, because now I'll never have to explain this ever again.
That's right. There you go. That you've got your elevator pitch all set.
I know, right?
No,
now I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. What you?
I was just going to add. The other thing I wanted to do with Nightshades is I feel like as you know, all urban fantasy tends to be either an open world or a closed world. So either there's a secret hidden world and most humans don't know about it, or there's a hidden world of magic and everybody knows about it. And either way, it's like, well, how do we deal with this? How do we keep the secret, or how do we all get along? But what I really wanted to write about was like the 5 minutes right after most of the world finds out about magic, or about a species that's
right.
Basically
there's more than what they thought. They thought.
Like Charlene Harris's books have. It's been like 8 years. It's been 10 years since vampires came out of the coffin. And like Faith's books, Faith Hunter's wonderful Jane Yellow Rock series, it's been since I think the 50s, since Marilyn Monroe attacked JFK in the White House, right? Because she's a vampire.
Right. Yeah.
But I just hadn't seen anything about like, well, what would happen if tomorrow we found out that vampires are real? Like, how would Congress handle it? How would the laws handle it? How would people react? And it's been interesting because one of the things that I wrote in like the second book, I think, was that even though humans found out that vampire saliva is like a hypnotic, and so you could just kind of lick your finger as a vampire and shake someone's hand and now they're yours. And I wrote specifically, but people just won't give up handshakes. Like too much of a tradition.
Right.
Won't give it up, even though, the smarter ones have figured out that like it could be dangerous. So I did kind of have to eat my words there when we all moved to elbow touching as a
right. Well, I guess they could do that too, but that would be a little more. That would be a bit more
involved,
noticeable if somebody were rubbing their elbow after touching.
Right.
So, yeah. Now the Disrupted Magic series picks back up with Scarlet again, and that has a couple of books in it as well. So
the publisher weren't eager to go back to Scarlet because again they love trilogies, but by then the Boundary trilogy had come out and had done really well, and so I was able to kind of convince them, please let me write Scarlet again, but I'll have a time jump. I'll make her a little older and a little smarter, and kind of sort of almost rebooting the series. So they said, okay, but we're going to call it the Disrupted Magic books instead of the Scarlet Bernard books. And I'm like, you do you, marketing. Like, more Scarlet.
Right. And I guess from their perspective, it made it sound as though, oh, look, we've got something new from this author.
But, I did work really hard to make it an entry point. I kind of say like the Old World series is the Old World umbrella is sort of my main thing that I'm known for. But there's 3 different entry points to it. You can start at Dead Spots, you can start at Boundary Crossed, or you can start at Midnight Curse and read 3 books and then go and jump anywhere else, in the timeline. So I've tried very hard. I think it works.
Well, and I know that a lot of readers appreciate that because sometimes it is difficult to determine where do you start and do you miss too much, or people, might pick up something and not realize it's book 3 or 4 and then be like, oh. So
yeah,
a job well done. Thank you on behalf of readers. Now, amongst any of your series, who are some of your favorite secondary or recurring characters to write? Who've you enjoyed the most?
Oh, what a fun question. I wasn't going to try to like do a weird plug, but over on my Patreon, I've been writing short stories. This is what I've been doing during the pandemic. I really have not been able to pull a lot of like full length novels together with everything going on in my life in the pandemic. So instead, every month I've been writing short stories about old world characters, the ones that I love.
Oh,
like,
okay.
Because I don't know how other writers do it. I put way too much thought into like the backstory and personality of secondary and tertiary characters, right? And then like I'm the only one who knows any of it. Just a terrible waste of time. So it's been so fun to write short stories from sort of these perspectives. And I accidentally I wrote a lot. So years ago, I was asked to participate in a compendium, an anthology with a new story that could be set in the old world. And so I wrote about a young healing witch named Sashi. And that was just a one-off novella. Well,
right.
I also, used it as an origin story for one of the werewolves in my book. And the thing is, I wasn't really when I finished writing that novella, Bloodsick, I had no plans to write any more Sashi stories at all. But I kept thinking about her, and I kind of missed her. And so I introduced her as a secondary character who kind of pops in and helps out because she's a tremendously strong healing witch. So she's not an ass kicker, but when someone you love who's human gets hurt, you can call her and come in. So I started kind of bringing her back. And then I was like, well, what would she be up to? Who would she be friends with? What would happen to her kid? She has a daughter at the end of Bloodsick. And, so then I started bringing in the kid, and I accidentally sort of built this whole little story that at first threads through the main novels. But since I've been writing short stories, I've written 3 about this family. The mother, the father, and the daughter, and kind of they live in different places and they do these different things. And so now, some of my longtime Patreon followers who like the books are like, Melissa, make this a book, like make this stories. So that one was really, really surprised me. And the other character, I have to say, Molly, who I introduced in Dead Spots as almost kind of a foil for Scarlet. She's Scarlet's vampire roommate, and she was turned when she was very young, and she wants to look older. She wants to age her body to match, her insides a little bit more. So she wants to be around a null like Scarlet, because when she's close to Scarlet, she can age and eat people food and do all kinds of stuff that humans get to do. And when I wrote when I wrote Dead Spots, the first book, I didn't I just kind of, threw her together and put her in the book. And then I kind of got a little bit more involved in her in Trail of Dead and a little bit more. And then readers were sending me messages about how much they liked Molly. And so that was a case where she surprised me, like just the amount of affection that readers had for Molly made me like Molly more, and it made me write for her more. And eventually I wrote an origin story, short story for her. And then by the time I was on my 7th old world novel, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. She just needs a book where she's basically the star. And so that's why the Midnight Curse, she's, it's still a first person narrative from Scarlet's perspective, but Molly is the engine of that book. She is the plot. And her choices and her past really affect her. So that was a secondary character that I just fell in love with, and because my readers fell in love with her.
Yeah, and I think one reason that she might have the appeal that she does is that even though when you're reading about her, she's a vampire, she enjoys being human.
Yeah.
So, that she doesn't seem quite as threatening, I think. And I think that's why people can kind of, get a kick out of her. And what I kind of enjoy too is that, Scarlet doesn't always know, well, how much is she reporting on me? How much
Right.
is she kind of spying on me? But it's still a mutually beneficial
Relationship. Yeah.
relationship, so she doesn't mind so much. But yeah, I can see why she would be popular and that
Yeah.
she would be fun to write.
Yeah. Well, and I
And
think, at the beginning, I had her really love like romantic comedies and because, Molly is a reluctant spy and she doesn't want to necessarily spy on Scarlet, but she sort of, she, and she's been through some trauma, which we don't find out until later, but she really kind of constructs this fun, bubbly existence and like this fun, bubbly persona. So it's for Scarlet, it's like coming home and walking into a romantic comedy where she's like stuck doing,
right.
like it's so annoying. And Scarlet is so just like dark and twisty and sarcastic, and resentful. And then Molly is just so like just bubbly and fun because she's trying to be, and really trying to project that. And so that's been such a fun dynamic to write. And it's also really fun. Molly's a great way to remember like the little tiny, because sometimes I, Melissa, will just be out in the world and I'll be like, oh man, vampires could never go to this restaurant. There is garlic everywhere. Or I'll just have this thought in my head. And all those thoughts always make it through Molly's mouth because, I always have her react. Like, it's so fun to get her to react to like making sushi for the first time, or like just these little weird rituals that humans are into. And like, why do humans do this? And wow, it's really fun to go to water parks. Like she just has these little reactions that mostly come from me being in my life and thinking, oh man, what would vampires do in this situation?
So now you have to ask yourself, what would Molly do?
Right. Yeah.
Now, from your perspective, who or what do you feel was the most dangerous adversary that Scarlet and or Lex have had to face so far?
Ooh, what a fantastic question.
Oh, well, thank you.
Carol. That's a great one. So I don't want to give too much away that is like a big twist, but I think that for Lex, the answer is so easy. And it's the Draugr, the death god that she faces in Bound Reborn, because it really connects her to her own mysterious past that she didn't know much about. And it hits her on every level. It's external power and it's internal like angst just everywhere. So for her, that one's easy. For Scarlet, it's trickier because Scarlet has really, it's not often personal for Scarlet, because she considers herself and she is such an outsider in terms of because she exists kind of between the two worlds. She's mostly a human. She's not a ninja. She doesn't have any like fireballs coming out of her hands or anything. She's just like all average human strength, speed, whatever. But when she is around the supernatural, it levels the playing field, right? So she really is just a walking leveled playing field. It turns everyone human. So it's less personal for her. But I will say that the villain of Trail of Dead, the second Scarlet book, has probably been the most influential and the most just impactful to write. I've enjoyed writing all my villains. After about my second book, I start, once you've really established your protagonist and you're writing a series, each book becomes more about the villain for me than anything else. So now the villain is my starting place. When I start writing, I'll kind of have, okay, I want this book to have this and this and this, and kind of be in the back of my head. But when I'm really like, okay, time to roll up sleeves and dig into plot, the first thing that matters is the villain and what they want and how they've managed to convince themselves that they're the good guy. Because most villains, every now and then you'll have a villain who's like, the mustache twirling.
Right. I'm evil and I know I'm evil. Yeah.
But most of them have convinced themselves that they're right and they're doing the right thing. so the Trail of Dead was probably the most emotionally difficult villain for Scarlet, but I loved writing the villain team up, the team of villains in Shadowhunt, the 6th Scarlet book. That one was just so fun, and it was fun to have dog monsters and demented evil horses and all these things.
I like demented evil horses. Okay. Now, how would you say that what would you say are the biggest personality differences between Lex and Scarlet, and how do you think they're most alike?
You know, in my heart, I see them as having a very strong big sister, little sister vibe. You know, where Lex she is so solid and mature, and you know, she has PTSD symptoms. She has a claustrophobia. She deals with these, you know, different fears and different things, but like at her core, she is like so dependable and responsible and kind of serious. And Scarlet is like the annoying younger sister who can't stop poking her or being like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. You know, and so, and the fact that they met on the very wrong foot, where Scarlet, whose job is to clean up crime scenes, and she disposed of the body of Lex's twin sister. So they did not meet well. Lex knew that from the beginning. And so Lex wants so bad to hate Scarlet. Like, she wants so hard to think of her as like this enemy. And at the same time, they just keep helping each other. So that's been fun to write. And it's also been so fun to write LA vibe versus Colorado vibe, because, you know, Scarlet is from California. She's Californian. And she's got a little bit of that LA thing where, you know, she's a jumble of different viewpoints and just kind of her own. And then Lex is just from Boulder, Colorado, which is a very liberal, you know, very health-focused town. I love Boulder. I think it's so fun that the entire city has come together as one and declared war on gluten. You know, good for you. I'm glad you united behind a cause. You know, so it's so fun to send Lex to Colorado, or send Lex to California, or send Scarlet to Colorado, you know, and put them together like that and have them bounce off each other is so much fun.
And do you have a favorite installment from each of your series? Is there a particular book from each one that it really is your favorite? Either that you're most pleased with the product, or you just have fond memories of writing, whatever the reason may be.
You know, for the longest time, I said Trail of Dead was my favorite Scarlet book. I still am. I'm so damn proud of that book. I wrote it when I, in part, had hyperemesis as I was pregnant with my second child. I was very, very ill for the writing of that book. But it's also the book where I really leveled up as a writer. You know, it's my Batman Returns, where I introduced 2 villains instead of 1, and really just get so much deeper into the relationships. So, you know, early on in my career, I would definitely have said that one. Later now, I would have to say my favorite Scarlet book is Shadowhunt, just because I'm so proud of how many different storylines are woven together. You know, there's this interpersonal relationships, and then there's, you know, that's the 6th Scarlet book. All the 5 before kept kind of pointing toward it. Like, there were these hints, these like threads that all sort of I braid together in Shadowhunt, you know. And so I think that one's probably my best accomplishment, just because I had so many different threads to weave at the same time in Shadowhunt. For the Lex books, it's a lot harder, especially because I think that much more than Scarlet series, the the Boundary books are very location heavy and very location dependent. You know, LA is just a backdrop for the Scarlet books. I do use some iconic LA locations and some under the radar locations, but really, you know, it's back. It's the back.
Right.
Whereas in the Boundary books, the location is so much more central to the stories. Colorado and the history of Colorado. You know, there's a recurring set piece at a brothel that, you know, closed down and is now haunted by the ghost of a dead Boundary witch.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so,
those are great scenes. Yeah.
yeah, I love writing Nellie, the dead 1890s prostitute. But I would have to say Boundary Born, simply because the location in that was just handed me the book. Much of that book is set at the Denver Botanic Gardens, which is a lost cemetery. It is a cemetery where the government in Denver it was the first cemetery in Denver. It was not well taken care of. People just kind of went in and threw bodies wherever. There was no records. It was a mess. And so the city eventually kind of had to do something because it was getting smelly. And they hired an undertaker to dig up the bodies and move them to a new location. Unfortunately, they thought it would be a good idea to pay him by the coffin. And so he would find a body and spread it in, you know, 2 or 3 coffins.
Oh my God.
And by the time the city figured it out, you know, they were way over budget and way behind schedule. And so they fired him and they didn't hire anyone else to do the job. So the bodies were never moved. I think it's estimated like 4,000 bodies in between the Botanic Gardens and Cheeseman Park next door today. And so I actually found all of that out on a research trip in September one year, and I flew back out in October to take the night tour of they do not during COVID, but they used to do this Ghosts in the Garden sort of ghost tour led by the security guards who watch the property at night. And so for that one, I think that book is my biggest Lex accomplishment, just because it's the best villain and it's my favorite location I ever wrote. I mean, I had to do so little work to come up with the Botanic Garden stuff. Like, that was just handed to me.
Right.
And I love it so much. Oh, excuse me. I have a gentleman who's trying to say hi.
Oh.
He really wants to be involved in whatever I'm doing that's not petting him.
Now that's Frankie, right?
This is Frankie. I took Brody for a 1-hour hike this morning so that he would be well behaved during this panel. But
okay. Well, hi, Frankie.
This is the frog goblin.
He looks as though he's waiting for that love, and he's getting exactly what he wants.
The thing is, this is just his face. Like, we call this Western tragedy face because his face just always looks like, you know, you broke the news that his dad's not coming home from World War II.
Right.
Yeah. He always just received this information and very, very upset.
Yeah. Well, he does, but you can tell that he's very happy to get his neck and chin rubs there. So,
all right, but can I finish?
Now we've had Frankie make a guest appearance on the panel. If Scarlet and Lex could make a guest appearance just as like a one-off thing in any other urban fantasy series, what would you like to see each of them be able to do, or where would they go?
Oh, I think about that all the time. I would definitely send Scarlet over to Harry Dresden because I think that would be hilarious. Yes. And I don't say this in a kind way. I'm being very mean to Jim Butcher because Scarlet nullifies all the power around her.
Right.
So it would just be like unplugging all of his characters. And I think that would be so funny because, you know, everyone in those books has like remarkable powers. And so it would just be so funny to have Harry just kind of stuck there. You know,
yeah, exactly.
Like those memes of Spider-Man standing in a flat field and Spider-Man's always going.
Right.
But Lex, Lex is a little different because I always think that her like the books like spiritual sisters with the Jane Yellow Rock series. I think those two characters have so much in common just in terms of their attitude, and like they, you know, they're both just very, you know, they're in leadership roles, but they're like, let's get this done, you know?
Right.
And so I honestly think Lex and Jane Yellow Rock could do literally anything.
They probably could, yeah.
In there, because like, what conflicts could there possibly be? Like the combination of Lex and Jane Yellow Rock, there is nothing that could stop them. I think
that's a good point. I could see that. Yes, that could happen. Well, now that who are some of the writers who've been the most influential for you, either and we've talked about a few of them from in the past, you know, in terms of your own work, but also just in terms of these are people that you admire, how they construct a sentence or how they put a narrative together, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was first reading, or when I was reading urban fantasy and just starting to think about writing, at that time, the Harry Dresden books were really huge for me. And also Charlaine Harris and her Sookie Stackhouse books. And now I really admire, I admire authors for different reasons than I did back then. And it's not that I admire those authors less. It's more just that like I have kind of shifted. And I now, you know, I feel like there's a lot of writers who write urban fantasy and are trying to be the next this. You know, they're trying to write the next Charlaine Harris, or they're trying to write the next Jim Butcher. And now I've really kind of shifted my admiration and focused it on the authors that really try to cut new ground. So Stephen Blackmore writes books, and he does things that you don't see a lot. I'm a really big fan of Ben Aronovich and Paul Cornell. Paul's a personal friend, to be fair, but he's my friend because I sought him out to talk to him about his books. They both write British detective stories, and I think just as a lot of American urban fantasy writers are just kind of trying to write Harry Dresden or trying to write Patricia Briggs books, I think there's a lot of British writers who write urban fantasy that's just trying to be Constantine. You know, I feel like every British writer in existence who's working in urban fantasy just really wants to write Constantine so bad. And I admire Ben and Paul so much because they write teams and because they write with London as a character. And so I enjoy that very much. And I, you know, anytime I recently read The Ninth House by Lee Bardugo. I don't know if I'm saying it right. And that's such a great example of just this, she just takes a wild swing and hits the ball. Or I can do everything. You know, she just takes this like such a unique idea and she writes an urban fantasy novel that is just so completely outside the mold as we understand it. So whenever I find something like that, I get very, very angry that I didn't write it myself.
That you didn't come up with it first.
Yeah, right. Well, like her sentences are beautiful too. Damn it. So I really like those a lot. And I have so much admiration for writers who, you know, kind of take this format and they do something amazing with it.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. And speaking of Ninth House, and you were talking about her sentences.
Yeah.
When I picked it up, back when it first came out, I picked it up in a bookstore and I read the first sentence and I was hooked. Talking about washing blood out of a sweater, but it was the way she said it.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I get that. I get that completely. And what kinds of things do you read for pleasure? You maybe some of these people you've just mentioned, are these the?
You know, It's interesting because I don't know about you, but my reading habits have really shifted with the pandemic. I've been reading a lot. This is going to sound weird. I don't really enjoy cozies, but I've been reading a lot of like British detective fiction that's kind of on the gentler side. You know, not as violent, not as gun focused. The series that really got me through the first huge chunk of the pandemic was by Ellie Griffiths, the Ruth. Oh, no, I can't remember her last name. It's a series about a forensic archaeologist who Ruth Galloway, the Ruth Galloway series by Ellie Griffiths. And it's so the main character is a forensic archaeologist. She's in her, you know, late 30s to early to mid 40s. There's like 14 books out, and they just kind of became my comfort food of the pandemic. It helps that there's a lot of them, of course.
Right.
And there's murder. Like they're not incredibly gentle. Like I consider cozies to be very gentle books, but they're just more gentle than I think. The mystery novels are such a happy spot for me, but I find it very hard to read a lot of male authors because a lot of those books seem to really lean heavily on, you know, murdering and abusing women. And I don't so much enjoy that.
No, I agree.
Frankie just peed on the rug because I was talking to you and I didn't let him out.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
No, it is your fault, so you should be sorry. Way to go, Carol.
I know. Now look what I did.
Deal with that later. This is the glamorous life of a writer, right? You put on makeup, you do a panel, and then you go clean up the dog pee.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it just goes to show that people can identify with that.
Right.
Well,
but no, just to finish the thought, like I haven't actually been reading as much urban fantasy during the pandemic. It's really been a lot more mysteries, and it's been a lot of international, like some Australian series, Jane Harper's books, Candace Fox's books, some of the various like little like murder mysteries in, you know, the UK somewhere. Just they take me out of, you know, my day-to-day boring reality because they're set in international countries, but they're also kind of not, they don't feel like you should be writing, where a lot of urban fantasy, when I read it now, like you should be writing, like you should be doing this. You know, it's like almost like a little like voice in my head, like this is what you're supposed to be doing right now, Melissa.
Yeah, and instead you're not. Yeah, no,
yeah, exactly.
I get that. That makes sense. And I think that maybe the appeal of reading something that's international, it's, you know, for a while that was the only traveling anybody was going to do, you know, and unless you know, you had to be somewhere else because of you know, some disaster or whatever. Now, getting to the life of a writer, do you prefer absolute quiet when you're writing, or do you like to have some kind of background noise or sound?
So I like a little background noise, but not music, because it can't be music with words. Because then, like, if it's music with words, then part of me is always like listening to the words and interpreting them. But even like orchestral music, you know, the point of music is to project a mood, and I need to write the mood I need to write. So like once in a while I'll line up my scene, the tone of a scene with the tone of music, like, and listen to some acoustic something. But for the most part, I use a white noise app and listen. Like if I'm at a coffee shop or something, obviously not so much these days, but even like if my kids are home and running around or the dogs are making noise, you know, I'll put on headphones and turn on a white noise app, and just have some kind of background, something like just playing low, because otherwise I'm listening for problems. You know, I'm listening to mom, or the sound of my dog peeing in the other room, you know, which I heard just now. So like I need something, but it can't be something that's going to distract me from what I'm doing.
That makes sense. That's kind of, I kind of have that issue trying to listen to audiobooks.
Yeah.
In the car. It's like, no, music is good, but if I'm trying to, I'm always afraid I'll forget where I'm going. But
yeah, if you know a book is good when you get lost.
Right, exactly.
I've definitely done that.
We don't want to go there. So, and for my last question, what are some of your favorite shows and movies that you've been watching lately?
Oh my gosh.
So
many. I ran out of American television at some point, and then I ran out of British television, and now I'm on Australian television.
Okay.
Not kidding. I just watched The Gloaming, which finished up from Stars, and that was pretty good. I'm watching some of the Jack Irish stuff starring Guy Pearce, which is pretty good. I've been talking a lot about the first TV show that I binge watched during the pandemic. Was a British procedural police show called Line of Duty. And oh God, I think I smell poop too. God damn it. Okay, so anyway, Line of Duty. Line of Duty is a freaking amazing show, I think. I can't really tell because it was the first show that I watched during the pandemic, and every night for like the first month of the pandemic, every night I would like sit down with a cocktail and a puzzle and Line of Duty, and I love it so much. But the thing I love is that most British TV police dramas are dramas. It's like, let us introduce this detective and all their personal life problems. Here's their mother living alone on this farmhouse, and here's their daughter struggling through community school. And oh yes, there was a murder. And now here's their partner going through their own shit. And every British show is it's very unwinding. Like it unwinds. And Line of Duty is like fucking cops, interrogations, fights, another fight. Is it a betrayal? No, it's a double betrayal. And it's so fun because, it's every season follows one, it's like this sort of internal affairs, the British version of internal affairs unit. And like every season they have one like renowned police officer that they are investigating to see if they're actually corrupt. And like this show, I've invented like 4 different drinking games for Line of Duty because like when they interview people, Carol, they do like 2 interrogations an episode. And whenever they do an interrogation, they start the recorder. And whenever they start the recorder, for reasons no one understands, the opening beep is like 90 seconds long. So it's a bunch of actors. It's this very tense scene. Someone hits the button and it goes, beep. I love it so much.
Well, now I'm curious about it, so I'll have to
let me know if it's really good or if I just remember it from all the booze. But
okay,
there's good names. They get some really bigger names and some great cast. And although the whole unit is run by this older gentleman who always goes, like every time something mildly surprising happens, he goes, "Mother of God." And there's one thing I do, and that's catching bent coppers. It's just, oh God, it's amazing.
Now I'm very curious about that. I'll have to
right now. It's on
okay.
Hulu or Amazon Prime.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to be checking that out, and I bet you some of our viewers will as well.
Oh my gosh, all of you watch it, and just you're welcome.
Well,
Line of Duty,
and I want to
so much smarter to promote something that in some way related to my work or like one of my friends' work, and say something nice about someone who like I might actually nope, I don't care. It's Line of Duty. Watch Line of Duty.
Well, now to be honest, you did mention some friends as well, so you did that part. So, but I would like to thank you for being here today, for taking the time to sit down and answer a whole bunch of questions. And
you are so welcome, Carol. But also, my time is not valuable right now. So yeah, this was not a hardship for me.
well, time is still time, whether you regard it as actually being valuable at any given moment, it still is in many ways. So I do appreciate it, and I want to thank everyone who has been watching along with us, people who will watch this later. And just to let you know what else we have coming up, we have on the 27th, we will have our Supernatural Rewind for season 4, where we will be discussing the season as a whole. And our author interviews coming up next month. June is a special month, and you will have 2. One of the interviews will be with Eric Asher, and one is going to be Kim Harrison. So stay tuned for those, and those details will be posted on the Facebook page later on. But once again, thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to talk with you, and hopefully the next time I do, it will be in person. We will.
Yes,
our
that would
fingers
be
crossed. So,
That would be nice.
anyway, well, thank you so much, and I will talk to you soon, and we will hope that our viewers will be passing the word about this fun interview. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.